It all began on a day I had been waiting for all year. I was standing at the stove in my small kitchen, inhaling the smell of freshly baked cherry pies, mentally going over the final touches for dinner. Today was my 60th birthday. Not a big round anniversary, but it was special to me. My first birthday after retiring, and I had dreamed of spending it with my family. On the table was the porcelain dinner set I inherited from my mother, a crystal carafe of fruit juice, and fresh flowers from the garden in a tall vase. In the oven, a roasted pork loin was baking, my eldest son Oleg's favorite dish. I had even bought the specific grainy mustard he'd loved since childhood. At exactly 6 o'clock, I set the table. Oleg, his wife Larisa, and their son Dima were supposed to come, as well as my daughter Sveta with little Kasyusha. I even bought a new dress, blue with a soft collar, in which I felt a little younger. The clock struck 6, then 6:30. At 7, I called Oleg. "Mom," his voice was rushed. "We're not coming. Larisa has a work meeting. Dima is studying for a test. You know how it is, we're swamped with things to do. We'll drop by sometime later." Sometime later. That word landed in my chest like a heavy stone. I mumbled, "Of course, son, I understand," and heard the call end with a dial tone. 10 minutes later, a message came from Sveta. "Mom, Gzusha has a cold. We can't make it either." Sorry. I sat alone at the table, staring at the candles that had burned down halfway. The food was getting cold. The house was filled with a silence in which I first clearly felt that my children took me for granted, as if I would always be here, always wait, and always understand. The next morning, after talking to my neighbor, I opened my laptop and found an ad. My dacha, my apple trees, my little bench, my house with the blue-framed windows, was photographed from 5 angles and listed for sale, due to the owners relocating. I reread the text 3 times, as if the words could change from my stubbornness. They didn't. I called Oleg again. He didn't pick up right away. In the background, I could hear dishes clattering, a TV, and someone laughing. "Mom, I'm on the road," he said quickly. "I saw the ad." "So?" he said, with an irritated tone, as if I had disrupted a normal routine. "We discussed this. Collateral, quick, temporary. Temporary means selling. Mom, you're getting confused with these words. The market is hot right now. We have to seize the moment." "It's my dacha." "It was," he said coldly. "The documents are in my name. It was easier that way for the loan. We're family." I heard the hiss of his breathing through the phone, then a quick dial tone. That's when I first felt a thin thread of anger begin to uncoil inside me, the very thread I had been hiding for years under phrases like, "Oh well, and I understand." I went to the government service center. I was wearing my warm gray coat, old but clean, with a mother-of-pearl button I had sewn on last winter. In my pocket was a folded-up receipt for my gardening cooperative fees and a key with a green tag that said dacha. The air in the waiting line smelled of damp jackets, cheap coffee, and paper. To my right, a man was arguing about his residency registration. To my left, a girl was filling out a form to change her last name. The girl at the window, with her winged eyeliner and a thin gold chain, smiled politely. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to see the information for this property," I said, handing over the address and cadastral number I had memorized. She scanned the screen, clicked her mouse, and her lips tightened slightly. "The owner is a citizen," she said, and named my son. "There are no liens or encumbrances. Preparations for a sale are underway." "But," I swallowed, "I bought the land and house 20 years ago." "That doesn't matter now," she said. According to the database, he is the current owner. I walked out feeling as if someone had pushed me in the chest with an open hand. The cold air smelled of something metallic, something wintry. At the bus stop, the wind pulled at people's hats, and the bus was packed. I rode home, staring at my dark blue gloves, worn thin at the fingertips, trying to remember exactly when I had signed those accursed papers. Was it at the kitchen table? Or at the notary's? Who poured the tea? Who said, "Come on, Mom, it's just a formality"? That evening, I went to Oleg's place. Larissa opened the door immediately, her brow furrowed, a towel wrapped around her head. The apartment smelled of a damp towel, expensive shampoo, and fried chicken fillet. "We're having dinner," she said instead of hello. "Is this urgent?" "Very," I replied, and walked in without taking off my coat. Dima was sitting at the table wearing headphones, eating pasta. He looked up, nodded, and went back to his phone. "Has the ad been taken down?" I asked. "Mom." Oleg put down his fork and dabbed the corners of his mouth with a napkin. "Don't make a scene." I pulled out a chair and sat down opposite them. On the table were neat square napkins, a rice cooker was puffing away, and a sun-shaped clock was ticking. Everything was orderly, clean, and alien. "You sold my dacha," I said, "and you're going to sell the garage, too." "It's an investment," Larissa said, crossing her arms. "We got a mortgage for Dima. He needs a future." "Doesn't my past matter?" I felt my voice become thin. "The logs, the boards, the bricks, they're not just property. They're... Emotions aren't currency." She cut me off. We retook responsibility." "At whose expense?" Oleg stood up, paced to the kitchen, from the window to the fridge, and then suddenly turned to me. "Mom, is it so hard for you to say yes?" he said. "We're going to fix everything anyway." I saw in his face my little boy in first grade, cheeks like apples, a forehead under a bobbled hat, crying over the letter G, and at the same time a grown man who was saying the detached phrase, "We're going to fix everything anyway." I was caught between these two images, like in a torn net. I said no, I said, straightening my back for the first time in years, just as my mother had taught me. Shoulders back, chin down. "It's too late," my son said, and took his plate with a furious movement, as if it were to blame. "The documents are signed." I walked out and realized I had forgotten my scarf on the back of the chair. I didn't go back for it. Let them keep my warmth. Maybe it would warm them up somehow. A day later, 2 sturdy young men from an appraisal service came to my door. One, in a puffy jacket with a torn zipper, glanced around the rooms and pursed his lips. The second smiled politely. "Inventory for a loan," they explained. "And why do you need an inventory of my apartment?" I asked, feeling that familiar irony rise in me, the kind that saves you when you're scared. "Well," the young man cleared his throat, "you're probably the guarantor." I flinched. A guarantor? The chair in the hallway suddenly seemed alien, the door alien, the doormat alien. I had signed temporarily, and now I was in a noose. The young men left, leaving behind a form with gray boxes and a list of my belongings. Wardrobe, 1 PC, chest of drawers, 1 PC, refrigerator, 1 PC. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the lines where 40 years of my life were 1 PC, 1 PC, 1 PC. Sveta called. "Mom, why are you making a fuss? Oleg said you're being hysterical." "I'm not being hysterical. I'm protecting what's mine." "From whom? From your own son?" She laughed a short, unpleasant laugh. "You've always been soft. Maybe it's time to admit that the younger generation knows better?" I was silent. In the receiver, I heard her blanket rustle and the TV click on. Fine, she said. Listen, Kshusha has a paid speech therapy class. Can you help out? I closed my eyes. Help out! In that word, I heard not a request, but a familiar command. No, I said, not right now. Is it a matter of principle? Sveta sounded offended. Or do you not have the money after that DACA of yours? After that conversation, she didn't answer my messages for a week. On Friday, I drove to the Dasha. A thin layer of snow had fallen, as if someone had sprinkled the earth with flour. A new padlock hung on the gate. A "for sale" sign was stuck in the ground like a splinter in my heart. Ma'am, who are you? A security guard at the entrance to the gardening cooperative asked. A red stripe that read "On Duty" was on his jacket. I was the owner. I want to take my apple tree, the small one in the pot. I planted it myself. And the bench. You can't. Everything is the property of the owner. I stood there, squeezing my gloves, and realized that the memory of the apples would only remain in my palms. I took the bus back. The keys to something I no longer owned rustled in my pocket. At home, a letter was waiting for me. A notice of debt for the initiation fee at the garage cooperative. I went to the garage to argue. There, on the top shelf, in a TV box, were my husband's tools, neatly tied with an old leather strap. I knew if I didn't take them today, a new padlock would be there tomorrow. The street smelled of gasoline and wet metal. I stood on a stool, reached for the box, and then a voice behind me said, "Mom, what are you doing?" It was Oleg. Next to him were two strangers, the same appraisers. My son was wearing a black jacket. His hair was a little damp, and I could smell his expensive cologne. "I'm taking what's mine," I answered, and pointed at the strap. "This was your dad's." "Everything here is property," one of the men said. "Under the collateral agreement?" "What collateral agreement?" The realization hit me hard. "Mom," Oleg took a step toward me as if I were a patient. "It has to be this way. We'll give everything back to you later." I carefully stepped down from the stool, pressing the box to my chest like a child. "Why do you think you have the right to dispose of something you didn't buy?" I asked quietly. "Because times have changed." Oleg tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You have a lot of character, but zero legal power." I understood. He believed in himself as a system. In me, he saw a tired artifact. "Okay," I said, "then we'll meet according to the rules of your system." I walked out with the box without looking back. The strap of my husband's tools was cutting into my palms. It was strange how things could bring back the life of those who were gone. On Saturday, I went to a free legal clinic at the district library. It smelled of dusty books, cheap soap, and coffee from a vending machine. A man in his mid-30s wearing a checkered shirt listened carefully and asked for my documents. "This could be a case of abuse of trust," he said, "but you'll have to prove it. You're the one who signed. You need witness statements, the circumstances of the deal, the fact that you weren't aware of the consequences." "I signed at the kitchen table," I admitted. "They were in a hurry." "That's not an argument, but sometimes courts side with the elderly if there's a clear injustice." The word elderly hit me like a wet rag. I left with a list of addresses of where else to go, and the feeling that my pocket was filled with small stone chips. On my way home, I stopped at the bakery. A loaf of white bread, 2 croissants for myself, and I even got a cheese pastry, just in case my neighbor Galia drops by. The bakery had such a warm, milky smell that I almost cried. People were standing, choosing pastries, and no one had the look on their face that was on mine, that strange mix of shame and stubbornness. At home it was so quiet, it felt like a layer on the carpet. I climbed onto a chair and took an old box of photographs from the top cupboard. My husband and I at the dacha with a bucket of apples. Oleg, still a teenager, with a mischievous smile, holding his first electric plane. Sveta with a blonde braid, with garden beds turned over by a pitchfork behind her. I stacked the photos. The loss wasn't about square meters. It was about having the proof that you even lived stolen from you. The next day, I was added to a family chat. I had never written in it before. At most, I would send postcards for holidays. Now, within a few hours, there were over 100 messages. Larissa sent a list of how to properly help your children. Sveta wrote, "Mom, you've hurt Oleg." Dima sent a raised eyebrow emoji. Some aunts from Larissa's side, whom I had seen once in my life, wrote, "Back in our day. Parents invested in the young generation." "Mom," Oleg finally wrote, "why are you making everything so complicated? Vanya's parents even mortgaged their apartment to open a coffee shop for him." "I am not Vanya's parents," I replied. "You've always been against progress," Sveta concluded. I closed the chat. Not because I was afraid of their words, but because I realized they weren't talking to me, but to a cardboard sign that read Mom. Allies and traitors appeared almost at the same time. My neighbor Galia brought me jars of jam. "Apple and plum, take it, you look so pale." She sat in the kitchen, sighed, and said the right words. "You have to be strong." But 2 days later, I learned from Larissa that Galia, out of kindness, had also given them my list of pharmacy purchases. And now Sveta was calling, "Are you sick? Do you need money? We're worried." They were worried, but not about me. At the Polyclinic's accounting office, a stern woman met me. "Did you sign a consent for personal data processing at the bank?" I did. "Well, there you go," she said, shrugging her shoulders. "Now, everything is forwarded wherever it needs to be." A foolish habit of trusting people. It turned out to be a checkbox on a form. But there was Lena, the librarian with red bangs. She brought me books from the reading room on the rights of pensioners and how to verify a transaction for authenticity, and didn't laugh when I got confused with the legal terms. She brought donuts wrapped in paper and a thermos of tea. Sometimes she would just sit opposite me and be silent. It was better than any advice. I found another ally by chance. At the bank, where I tried to understand the terms of the guarantee, the girls at the counters smiled like the brochures. But in the personal consultations corner, a short man with slicked back hair and dry hands was sitting. He looked at me and quietly asked, "Are you Oleg S.'s mother?" "Yes." "I'm not supposed to say this." He lowered his voice. "But pay close attention to the deadlines. They're on the verge of refinancing. They'll try to close the old agreement by opening a new one, this time without your participation." I thanked him. I walked out into the street with the feeling that I had been given a map where half the paths were drawn in pencil and the other half in tears. Soon, a note from the head of the garage cooperative arrived. "Your space has been seized in lieu of payment." I went to argue. The chairman, a stout man with gray temples who smelled of tobacco and machine oil, looked at me over his glasses. "This is a family matter," he said. "We're not getting involved. We go by the documents." That same evening, Sveta sent a voice message. "Mom, you're acting like a child. We can't always take your sentimentality into account. We have our own plans, you know." I turned off the sound, and for the first time in a long time, I burst into tears. Quietly, without sobbing, as if the water was finally leaving me. Then advice started coming from acquaintances. "Rent out your apartment. To the kids. That way you have both income and peace. Move in with Sveta. To babysit Kshusha." Sell everything and buy a studio by the sea. What's keeping you here?" I listened and nodded, but a completely different thought was growing inside me. Why is there no place for my life in this advice? Everywhere is someone else's needs, someone else's plans, someone else's comfort. Where is mine? On Sunday, I went to church, not because I had become more religious than before, but because it was quiet there. It smelled of wax and stone. I lit a candle for my husband and another one for the health of common sense. A little old lady in a black headscarf with wrinkles like furrows stood next to me. She patted my sleeve. "What's wrong, my dear?" "Nothing's wrong," I said. "It's a re-evaluation." "That's good. Let it be an evaluation of you by you." I carried those words home like a small warm stone in my pocket. The calls from Sveta became more frequent. Now she always had something urgent. One time, Ksyusha needed money for a class. Another time, "Oleg is stressed. Support him. You're his mother." Larissa wrote me a long message. "We understand that it's hard for you to let go, but Generation Z is different. Don't get in Dima's way of becoming independent." I reread "Don't Get in the Way" 20 times. They were offering me the role of invisible furniture, a convenient closet that holds everything they need and which doesn't complain when it's moved. That evening, I decided to make cherry dumplings, the same ones the children used to love. The dough was sticky on my fingers. I sprinkled the table with flour. The frozen berries shimmered in a bowl. I made them just as I used to. 12 on a board, 6 in a pot. The flame on the gas stove crackled. My phone blinked on the windowsill, but I didn't go to it. The dumplings floated to the surface like little white birds. I put them on a plate, poured sour cream over them, sprinkled them with sugar and cinnamon. I sat and ate alone. And I thought that loneliness is sometimes just honesty. You admit that you are with yourself right now, and that is not a catastrophe. A couple of days later, I was invited to a family council. I went, even though I knew what it was about. Oleg and Larissa were already there. Days Sveta and Ksyusha Shai, by the window, and Larissa's mother-in-law, Aunt Nina, was by the cabinet with her eternal phrase, "Back in our day." On the table was store-bought Caesar salad, plastic forks, and glasses without wine. "Mom," Oleg began, "we want to talk calmly. You're being emotional. We need to be constructive." "Constructive is giving me back what you took," I said. "Can we do this without accusations?" Larissa took a breath. "We offered you to move in with Sveta. It would be better for you there. You'd be close to the kids and you'd have care." "I don't need care yet," I said. "I need respect." Aunt Nina cleared her throat. "It's hard for young people. Everyone has loans. And you're just sitting on your square meters." Sitting on my square meters. As if I were a crow on a wire. "I have a question," I said. "Why did you say temporarily, if you were planning to sell?" "Mom," Oleg looked at me wearily. "If we had told you the truth, you would have put up a fight. This way, it's easier for everyone." Everyone meant them. I realized this council wasn't about reaching an agreement, but about persuading me to sign something else. Sveta took out a sheet of paper. "We've prepared an agreement. We'll temporarily transfer your apartment to Oleg's name to lower the interest rate. You'll still live here, just like before." I felt the blood rush to my temples, thinner, craftier, harder. I stood up. "No," I said, "you're confusing softness with silence." Ksyusha whispered quietly, "Grandma." But Sveta silenced her with a look. I walked out. In the hallway, 3 puffy jackets hung on a rack, a man's, a woman's, and a teenager's. Beneath them were alien shoes tied with elastic bands. I thought that every shoe has a pair, every pair has laces, but the word family should have respect as its pair, not use. Wet snow began to fall outside. I pulled up the collar of my coat and walked away with quick steps. Puddles splashed under my feet. The city smelled of wet stone. After the council, a flood of things began. Letters from the bank, notifications from the cooperative, discussions in chats about my inadequacy. Some distant relatives wrote, "Are you crazy?" Another said, "Think about Dima." And a third, "Go to a psychologist. Let go of the control." I made an appointment with a psychologist. A young woman with a ring on her thumb listened carefully, asking strangely simple questions. "What do you want for yourself?" I felt embarrassed, as if I had been caught doing something improper. I ran through the options in my head. Justice? Truth? Give me back my Dasha. I want to stop being treated as a resource. "That's a good way of putting it," she said, and smiled at the corner of her lips. "It frightens those who are used to you being a resource." That evening, I didn't turn on the TV. I got out a notebook and wrote 2 columns, what they took from me and what I have left. In the first column, the Dasha, the garage, the foreign word temporarily. In the second, me, the photos, the recipes, the ability to survive. At the bottom, I added, my voice. The final blow came from an unexpected place. At my part-time job at the archives, my contract was unexpectedly not renewed. "Optimization," they said. A day later, I saw them bring in the manager's nephew to take my place, with his chubby fingers, new smartphone, and a cheat sheet. I handed in my badge and went outside. In my bag was a mug with a cat on it. "To the best mom in the world," Oleg gave it to me about 10 years ago, a notebook with stickers and a pen I bought at a kiosk. I sat on a bench and laughed, for the first time in weeks, a funny, nervous laugh, but I was laughing. They had stripped me bare. Yes, but even threads can be woven into something new. In the evening, Lena from the library called. "Stop by tomorrow. I'll give you a name. Someone who isn't afraid of family matters. It's not free, but he only takes cases he believes in." "And do you believe?" "I see how you're holding on," Lena said, "and how you've stopped making excuses. That's usually enough." I hung up and finally opened the window. Let the night air come in. Let it carry away what had clung to the walls. On the windowsill was the mug with a bunch of parsley and water. The green stems were reaching for the dark sky. I thought, life grows even from a glass of water if you just once decide that you have a right to grow. At that moment, my phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring all your documents, don't be late." It was signed, Andre P. Lawyer. I draped the blue dress, the one I wore for my 40th birthday, over the chair and put my files in a clear folder, along with an old pen and my notebook. My heart was pounding not from fear, but from something else, something like anticipation. I don't remember when I stopped sleeping at night. Maybe it was the moment I first saw the ad for the sale of my dacha online. There were photos, apple trees in bloom, a neat strawberry patch, a bench under an old pear tree. I knew every board in that house. I had painted it myself, patched the roof, and put in the window glass after a winter storm. And now, a price, a realtor's phone number, the cold text, a great option for a country getaway. I remembered an evening when Oleg was 10. We were sitting on the porch of that very dacha. He was eating jam straight from the jar with a spoon and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll build you a big house so you can live like a queen." I smiled back then and stroked his head. And now, he was selling my home. These memories burned inside me. I walked around the apartment, touching familiar things: the embroidered tablecloth my mother was so proud of, the chipped mug that the grandchildren used to chase each other for, and felt that everything I had cherished was melting away in someone else's hands. In one of those sleepless dawns, I looked in the mirror. My face was tired, but my eyes were different. The old softness was gone. Only weariness and a firm, icy resolve remained. "Enough," I said out loud. The legal consultation was filled with the smell of coffee and the rustle of papers. A young lawyer listened carefully without interrupting, only occasionally looking up from his notepad. I told him everything: that fateful birthday, the phone calls, the papers I had signed. "You have a chance," he said. "It won't be easy. They will pressure you, but we have evidence that you were acting under duress and without full information." When I signed the power of attorney, my hands trembled a little, but it was the trembling of determination. Oleg called that evening. "Mom, have you lost your mind? Suing your own son. We're family." "Family, Oleg," I said quietly, "is not about taking advantage of someone's love." Larissa called the next day. "Do you realize you're ruining our lives? How could you, after everything we've done for you?" I almost laughed. "Done? You mean selling my house under the pretense of helping?" The court case lasted almost 2 months. At the hearings, I sat in my new dark blue suit, my back straight, my hands on my knees. I listened as Oleg and Larissa portrayed themselves as caring children, but in my mind a different picture emerged. Oleg yelling at me when I didn't give him money for urgent matters. Larissa once throwing away a gift I had bought for Dima, saying, "Don't bring garbage into the house." My lawyer clearly read out the messages and the recordings of our conversations. He spoke dryly, without emotion, but every one of his words hit them like a hammer. On the day the verdict was announced, the courtroom was as taut as a string. The judge read the ruling. The garage was to be returned to me, and I was to receive compensation for the dacha. I didn't flinch, but inside, a wave rose, not of joy, but of liberation. After the hearing, Oleg approached me. "Mom, let's talk. We can work everything out." I looked at him and understood. This grown man was no longer the boy who ate jam on the porch. "It's too late, Oleg. When the compensation came through, I found a small house on the edge of town. White walls, apple trees in the garden, a wooden porch. The seller, a smiling woman, said it's quiet here, the neighbors are nice." On the first evening, I brewed some tea and went out onto the porch. The smell of wet earth after the rain mixed with the scent of apple trees. Sveta called a week later. "Mom, you're mad, right? We're family." "Family is people who do the right thing, not just say pretty words," I replied. I hung up, and a feeling of lightness, which I hadn't felt in years, filled my chest. I remembered how I once feared being alone. But now I understood. Loneliness is better than betrayal. I looked at my quiet garden, and a knowledge, hard as a stone, settled in my heart. True strength is the right to be yourself, even if it means standing alone.